Okay, we're live, everybody. How's everyone doing out there? If you can hear me, let me know in the chat. It's good to be with you this Monday afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Duran Live number 34, Clown World, Geopolitical Clown World. Everything is upside down. Everything is in reverse. Yes, I see a lot of people saying honk honk. Yeah, it is that crazy.
Honk honk.
It is that crazy, folks. We have journalists getting arrested for telling the truth. Yeah, we have mass censorship everywhere. We have people who despise Trump. The Democrats despise Trump, but they're cheering him on to go to war in various places, Venezuela, Iran.
And William Barr is a Putin puppet. The next one revealed.
You just read my mind. Not only William Barr, Peter, Tulsi Gabbard is also doing the work of Russia because she came out and she defended Julian Assange.
I wish Putin would do more work for the Russian people instead of the Democratic Party. But anyway,
he's a multitasker, I believe.
Yeah, must be.
Must be. All right, well, let's jump into it, everybody. Hello from Bulgaria, from Serbia, Australia, Scotland. Hello, Noreen from Kenya. How you doing, Anthony? All right, from England, from Latvia. All right, good to have everybody here. Saya, Alex, please answer my question on Assange. Yes, we will get to Assange. Assange will probably be the main topic of the day, amongst other things in the news, but we'll talk a lot about Assange. Hello from Ghana, from London, New Jersey, England, Canada. And we have in Moscow, the legend, the myth, host of RT's Crosstalk, a show that is undergoing various algorithmic tricks at the hands of YouTube. Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how are you doing today?
The more I learn about what YouTube is doing, the more it depresses me, but that's what I should expect. Okay, we're going to talk about it during our chat.
All right. How's the weather in Moscow, by the way, Peter?
Spring is trying to make an opening here. We had snow flurries yesterday with the sun out. That's always really weird. Today, it's really windy, but a lot of sun. And for me, coming from California, sun is the most important thing, so I don't have anything to complain about.
All right. And someone who knows a lot about sun because he lives in the sunniest place in the world, that is London, England. The Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how are you doing today?
I am very well. Actually, today is a beautiful sunny day here in London. I mean, really, really gorgeous day. When London is sunny, it is stunningly beautiful. And can I just say, apropos what you just said, it's famous that the English have very pale skins because they get so little sun. I believe we get the least sun of any of the major European countries around the year. I mean, in the very far north, at least get the midnight sun in winter. We don't even get that. But today, it's an exception. We have a beautiful day.
That's why you had imperialism. That's why you had to conquer the world, because you had terrible food. You needed to conquer the world for food and sun. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now the world is coming to visit you. Okay.
Well, indeed. Well, indeed.
Yeah, for a man that comes from a very sunny country, Alexander, it is interesting.
Indeed. Yeah.
All right, guys, let's get to it. We got people from Cambridge. Nigel, hello, Nigel. From Chile, how you doing, Richie? All right, Noreen says, except for Ireland, Alexander. Ireland, I believe, has less sun, or what's the?
It might even have less. It might even have less, but it's very beautiful. I've just been there, and because they have so much rain, it's very, very green. That's why it gets called the Emerald Isle, by the way.
All right, great. All right, hello from Arizona. Hello, Susan. How are you doing? From Panama, Thailand. Okay, guys. So before we get hopping into the world of the clowns that we live in today, we have an Instagram page that you can follow us on, @theduran_com. Of course, you can always buy t-shirts at the Duran shop. You can donate to us on PayPal and Patreon. Send us your super chats. And if you're having any trouble getting any notifications, you can download the Blank Chat app and follow the Duran channel there, where we post all the notifications for all the videos that are posted live, as well as videos that are up and coming. So Alexander, the world is upside down, and we have Mr. Julian Assange in a prison in London. What's going on with Assange, and why is he under arrest?
Well, the reason he's under arrest,
the real reason,
well, the reason that's been given is because he jumped bail in relation to a Swedish case that was actually never brought against him. He was going to be questioned about it, but it was never actually brought. A case which doesn't exist because the Swedes have dropped it. But of course, the true reason is that the US wants him. They say they want him because he attempted to help Chelsea Manning, Bradley Manning as she then was, to break into a computer. Not, by the way, in order to steal anything from that computer, because Bradley Manning actually had access to that computer. The reason they tried to fake the password or break the password, it was in order to enable Manning to better conceal his identity. That's an important legal point, by the way. But anyway, even that case, to my mind, is really phony. The real reason the US wants him is because they've never forgiven him for the disclosures of the war crimes that were committed in Iraq, which he exposed with Bradley Manning, as he then was. And also, I suspect, equally damaging for the US, the famous Cablegate, which was when WikiLeaks leaked all the cables of the various US embassies, giving us an extraordinary insight into the way in which the United States conducts its diplomacy. So they've never forgiven him for those things. They've been determined to get him. There was also Vault 7 about a year or two ago, in which we learned about all the various dirty tricks the CIA gets up to. So what with one thing and another, they were out to get him. Mike Pompeo, when he was head of the CIA, he's now Secretary of State, made an extraordinary speech, almost a deranged speech, in my opinion, talking about Julian Assange being this, criminal running his own intelligence agency, which is a crazy idea. And now hostile intelligence agency, exactly. Anyway, now they think they've got him with this phony extradition case, which we're going to discuss, no doubt. And of course, as a result, Assange is in Belmarsh, a Category A prison for the most high-profile and dangerous criminals. That's where they put terrorists and murderers and people of that kind. And he's been kept in very, very secure conditions. And we're now waiting to see what the legal process will be and when the government will decide to extradite him to the US, and what the various legal battles will be when that happens. But I mean, we have to go through many layers to get to this story. But as I said, the true reason is that the US government has never forgiven him for the disclosures that he organized. And on top of that and beyond it, they want to make an example of him to scare anyone else from ever doing anything like that again.
Peter, you had, I believe, was it 2 or 3 shows in succession on Crosstalk on Assange? Break it down for us. What's going on?
Well, I mean, Julian Assange unveiled the crimes of others. That's the heart of all of this, okay? The interesting thing for me is over the years is that watching the evolution of this story and the different layers of smear that have been attached to him. Alexander Mercouris, we're blessed to have Alexander Mercouris here to go through the legal elements for us. But if you look at the mainstream media, they're not looking at the legality really of it all, because, well, they're usually just a bunch of idiots, okay? And what's far easier to do, and it's their habit today, is just to smear people, to destroy their character. They don't want to talk about the substance of those cables. They don't want to talk about the substance of the Afghan logs. They don't want to talk about the substance of the Iraq logs. They don't want to talk about the substance of the Podesta emails. I could go on and on and on. No, they don't do that. Chris Cuomo, you're not allowed to read these. It's illegal because they're stolen. You know, this is what they want, but we'll interpret it for you. Okay, Chris Cuomo. Wow, that's who you're following these days. So it's really it's almost like a temper tantrum, isn't it? You see all of this surrounding Julian Assange. His critics do not want to look at the essence, the substance of what WikiLeaks has achieved. I say achieved because that is the case. So for me, I mean, we had Alexander Mercouris on Crosstalk, and Alexander Mercouris did a wonderful job how the press in Britain is treating Julian Assange. Not mentioning the things I just mentioned, but mentioning constantly going back to this case in Sweden, which there's no case. Okay, they keep going back to it though. They want, it's the British government that essentially through the media wants Sweden to take another look at this. That's that part of the story, an invented story, presumably a invented honey trap story, just to smear his character. The Swedes have lost interest in it a long time ago. There was never any charges. There were never any charges, everyone. It was an investigation to see if they would come to conclusions where there would be charges, and they didn't. And as far as I know, the two women involved in it have recanted and just basically walked away from it. So this is what we're going to get for the next few months for sure, is just the destruction of his character. Look, I can fully accept someone not liking Julian Assange. I've heard some people say some very disparaging things about him, knowing him. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is to increase censorship, to put the fear of hell into any potential whistleblower. It is the national security state that wants revenge because it's billions of dollars of research and development were exposed. They were exposed for their illegal activity. They were exposed for they're embarrassed to the nth degree. And there are a lot of careers built on destroying Julian Assange. Okay, it's a business model, folks. But what is most terrifying for me in this whole story, and I've been saying it, I'm going to do another program on this tomorrow on Crosstalk, is the lack of any kind of moral integrity from journalists themselves. Okay, a handful have come up and defended Julian, but most of them won't. They're too cowed. They prize their celebrity. They prize their fat paychecks. They prize that getting along by going along. I mean, why should anyone stick their head out? Their status quo is great. The rest of their audiences, their status quo is not, and that's why we needed, and that's why we got WikiLeaks in the first place. WikiLeaks functioned where legacy media collapsed and fell apart with no moral compass whatsoever. WikiLeaks was invented because it was necessary. And if you look at the legacy media, they all went along with it, well, as long as it was titillating, okay? But when it gets down to is there an important place for whistleblowers in journalism, their verdict so far is no, and it's because they have no moral caliber whatsoever. And so the censorship is going to continue. And you know who's going to be on the front lines of pushing censorship? Journalists are. That is really pathetic.
Yes, they are. Alexander, I think it was the Independent UK, and they were publishing a video now that's making the rounds of Assange, given to them by the Ecuador embassy, of Assange skateboarding in the embassy. And they're basically trying to show, they're trying to show that Assange was disrespecting the embassy, was a little bit of a goofball. I don't know what the message that they're trying to put out there, pretty much a smear.
And so what?
And so what? Exactly. So what? I mean, in his private time, he skateboards in his room. God, I used to do that stuff all the time when I was a kid.
He had a lot of time on his hands.
He had a lot of time on his hands. Alexander, the UK media is going after Assange very, very hard. What do you make about that?
Not just the media, by the way, but I mean, a lot of politicians are. There's been this extraordinary 70 MPs who signed this bizarre letter saying that he should be extradited to Sweden instead of the United States. Sweden has no case against Assange. Can I just add Sweden has never had a case against Assange. There were some allegations which some officials in Sweden looked into. He was questioned about them in Sweden. He then went to Britain. The Swedes, most bizarrely, issued a European arrest warrant to get him back to Sweden. He offered to meet with them in Britain rather than go back to Sweden. There was a very complicated extradition case brought in Britain, which was really beyond bizarre, given, as I said, that he was perfectly willing to be interviewed in Britain about these things and had well justified reasons not to go to Sweden, because he was worried that if he did go to Sweden, he would be extradited to the United States. Then, after he went to the Ecuadorian embassy in 2013, the Swedes said, well, frankly, we're not interested in this matter anymore. The British told them, keep going, which I find utterly astonishing. And then, of course, eventually the Swedes seem to have lost patience. They interviewed Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, something that they were always absolutely capable of doing. Assange has provided the affidavit he provided them with, and it's on the internet. You can find it, and you can see what his response to those allegations is. And the Swedes let the case go. And yet now we have 70 British MPs trying to encourage the Swedes to bring this case that the Swedes themselves were never hugely motivated or interested in, and which they have long ago dropped and wanted to drop even further. And we have all these portentous and pretentious articles appearing in newspapers like The Guardian, talking about, how Assange, how this case shows that rape victims are not being treated properly, with the insinuation that, Assange has committed rape. And we've seen these bizarre stories about Assange having behaved improperly in the embassy, of which the long and the short and the totality of it is a film of him on a skateboard. If that is not a campaign for smears and a campaign of incitements and a campaign of character assassination, frankly, I don't know what is.
So really what the story is here, so it's switch and bait, okay?
Yeah.
Allegations that a government, Sweden, are no longer interested in. There was only an investigation. There were no charges ever laid. But don't think about war crimes committed by the U.S. military and its allies in these foreign wars. Never mind that the United States performed espionage not only against potential adversaries, but against its own friends, okay, all across the board there. Don't worry about those. It's like Chris Cuomo at CNN. We'll take care of that for you, okay? By the way, you have this megalomaniac, overgrown teenager that has a predilection for rape. That's what they want to do. See, This is what I'm talking about. This is changing the narrative. No, we got the goods on you. We got the goods on you, okay? Now, you're going to have to face up to it. But they say, no, they won't. And on top of it, we'll have our media watchdogs, our little bulldogs, to run our narrative for us. See, this is what's happened. See, let me tell you, the Pentagon Papers in 1971, seminal event in the history of journalism. But at the end of the day, it was journalists that defended Daniel Ellsberg. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court was on his side as well. Okay, this time around, you have the deep state and you have journalists that are singing from the same hymn sheet. And they're going to keep pounding away. They do not want to talk about the truth. They don't want to talk about the essence of this story.
Exactly.
And this is what makes it really terrifying, because they're creating a monopolitical culture where any form of dissent is that you're somehow good. They're going to go after your character. There's something wrong with your character. And because there's something wrong with your character, it must affect your beliefs in what's right or wrong.
Exactly.
Alexander, a question from Saya would like to know, can they delay any potential extradition of Assange? Can it be delayed either to Sweden or the US?
Right. Well, first of all, first of all, I think we should not talk about an extradition to Sweden because, as I said, the case there doesn't exist. If the Swedes revive the case, which I don't actually think there's any chance that they will, then, of course, there's already a decision that he should be extradited to Sweden in connection of it. But let me stress again, there is no case to extradite him on in Sweden. And there might be an argument anyway that the facts have now changed because we have this American extradition request. But let's put aside the Swedish side. If there is the process to deal with the extradition request from the United States is first the British government must make a decision whether or not to extradite him. If it does, Assange has a right to challenge that in the magistrates' court. If the magistrates' court decides to uphold the extradition request, he can challenge it in the High Court. If he loses in the High Court, he can challenge it to the British Supreme Court. There is a protracted legal process. It could take up to a year. That is the theory. I have to say, my worry is that it will be very truncated. And what we will see happen is that the British will agree to extradite him, plonk him on a plane to the United States before he's had an opportunity to consult his lawyers and before the British courts have had any time to have a say in the matter. I would add that I am far from confident that the case in the British courts would be handled well. I am very shocked that a British judge called him a narcissist at his bail case, and that does make me worry about some of the views some of the judges already seem to have formed of him. But in theory, this process could take about a year.
Peter, what do you make of many people that are saying Trump is playing 4D chess here and that he's bringing Assange to the US in order for Assange to rat out Hillary Clinton, Obama, all the other people that were wreaking havoc on his campaign? What do you make of that claim that Assange is going to give up the goods and WikiLeaks is going to give up the goods?
Well, I don't think it's Trump that is playing that game. I certainly believe that the deep state officials in the United States, once they get their hands on him, it's basically, I think what they're going to do is say, Julian, you can pay. I don't think the death penalty is in the cards, okay? But, Julian, you're facing, 35 years in prison. Well, we can work on that, but we're going to have to sweat you for the names. Give me all of the names of where you got all of this information. See, that's what they want. See, they want to make this so horrific when, parenthetically, Assange, he's sweated and he gives all the names. What they want to do is then they want to use that to go after all the people that presumably Assange gives up and go after those people and make it very, very public. So sending the message, never, ever, ever cross us again. As far as Donald Trump is concerned, I think his rather feckless commentary about I don't know much about it, I think that he really wants to keep distance from all of this. Okay, yeah. He's got the wind to his back right now. Okay, when the truncated, redacted report that's going to be coming out, the Mueller report after Barr gives due consideration, there's certainly going to be lines and paragraphs in there that's going to make Trump a bit uncomfortable. Though it probably won't be illegal, it might be unethical or it might be untoward. But I don't think he's in any kind of real jeopardy at all. In that sense, he is completely exonerated from prosecution. He won't be exonerated maybe for some untoward behavior or in his orbit. But I don't think really Trump wants to weigh into this whole thing. We know that there was no direct contact between Russia and WikiLeaks. There's no evidence of that there. We also know that there was really no evidence that the Trump campaign had much to do with WikiLeaks. Maybe they dropped them an email and say when's the dirt coming out on Clinton? Okay, I mean, but that if the Trump administration had been colluding with Russia, why would they need to even send an email to Julian? I mean, they would just be reporting to their handler. So my sense is that Trump is going to want to probably stay away from this one, okay? Because first of all, there's no upside. Again, does he want to have that Helsinki moment where what the media said is that he's siding with Russians over the intelligence community? You see what I mean? I don't think he wants to walk into that trap again. All right. And Donald Trump doesn't give, a rat's ass about Julian Assange. He cares about getting reelected. Okay. So why step up and do a noble thing when your goal is to get reelected and to go totally, what did Steve Bannon say? He's going to go total animal on his opponents. Yeah. Wait, why bring in the mix of WikiLeaks? So what's the upside for him?
But Peter, one thing that I saw on pretty much all the channels, whether it was Fox, MSNBC, or CNN, and even, for example, Ben Shapiro, everyone was just it was just, part of the narrative that Assange is a Russian agent. WikiLeaks works for the Russian. I mean, literally just part of the narrative. It was just accepted.
Yeah, I know. But
Tulsi Gabbard as well. Tulsi Gabbard, going down that point, spoke out in defense of Assange.
Well,
and all the replies on Twitter were, "Oh, Tulsi, we know who you work for. We know who Assange works for."
Well, see, that's why Trump is not going to want to get involved in this, because that kind of stuff will stick to him again. He doesn't want that, okay? I mean, no president that in my lifetime, probably in the history of the presidency, has experienced so much pressure from the media and his own government than Donald Trump. I don't think he wants to perpetuate that. So that's why he's not going to weigh in on it, okay? But I can tell you, and I've said this before, and I think it's important to repeat it, Russian intelligence agencies do not partner with anyone. They don't. It's always too risky. And Julian Assange had already had a reputation before all of this started. They're not going to get involved with a whistleblowing platform where they could be a connection could be made. But just isn't the way they work. They just don't work that way. And it's convenient. I mean, because that for the conspiracy theorists, when they make that connection, it seems almost kind of seamless. But that isn't a real one. It's elusive, and it's a dot you can't connect. But they have to believe it. Those two dots connect for the conspiracy theory to have any kind of meaning. Now, we all know it doesn't have any kind of meaning. These are almost kind of random dots connected together. That's what the last 3 years were all about. Okay, so. Like I said, I think Trump is going to sit this one out.
Alexander, you want to jump in?
Yes, I want to say first of all, two things. I think, first of all, Caitlin Johnson has replied very, very effectively to this argument that this is all case on Donald Trump's part of four-dimensional chess to try and save Assange by prosecuting him, bringing him over to the United States and then pardoning him. That's not going to happen. And I mean, the idea that Donald Trump is that kind of a person, and that he's going to save Julian Assange, and that his administration is persecuting Julian Assange in order to save him, is a bizarre idea. Now, as to the second point about Julian Assange being a Russian agent, which you're quite right, Alex, it's been brought up constantly. I would invite those people who say that to read Robert Mueller's indictment of the 12 Russians who Robert Mueller claims hacked the DNC computers. If you read that indictment carefully, nowhere in that indictment does it say that Julian Assange was aware that the people he was dealing with were part of Russian intelligence or were even Russians. All his dealings were with an entity called Guccifer 2. I am not going to discuss whether or not Guccifer 2 actually was Russian, but Mueller never says that Assange thought or believed it was Russian. And secondly, that indictment doesn't actually definitely say either that the data that was sent from Guccifer 2 to WikiLeaks was the DNC emails. He implies it. It's written in a way to make it seem that that is so. but it does not specifically say it. So we have to understand that those people who say that Julian Assange is working for the Russians are going far beyond what Robert Mueller himself has said in his indictments. I would add that James Comey, as FBI director, said exactly the same thing. He said that there was no direct contact between the Russians and WikiLeaks, and that the US intelligence assessed that the Russians contacted WikiLeaks via cutouts. So let us bury forever this myth that Julian Assange is a Russian agent working for the Russians. It is just as much of a myth as the myth that there is a case against him in Sweden, when there is none and never has been.
Yeah, but see, it's really important. Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right, is because you have to keep the Russia angle in this to keep the conspiracy moving, okay? That's why they're doing it, okay? Because their first major attempt was an utter failure. Now they're trying to fit in WikiLeaks into this here to keep it going. And so they will, again, you know, it's not about what WikiLeaks did or didn't do. It's all about fitting Julian Assange and WikiLeaks into their fantasy hoax, okay? And you see it all across the board. And I agree with Alexander Mercouris. It's so infuriating when you hear these broad brush statements made that don't have any basis in fact.
Yes. Well, they're smears. They're smears. You smear him for sex allegations, rape allegations, for which he's never been charged, and which he has responded to twice. He's twice been interviewed about them, and you smear him for being a Russian agent when, as I said, not even Mueller and Comey claim he was a Russian agent. So, you know, let's understand these things for what they are. They are smears. They are not the truth.
All right, Peter, the 4.2 billion from to Ecuador from the IMF. Did that play a role in Ecuador giving him up?
Absolutely. Wow, it's pay to play. That's what it's all about. It's all about the Benjamins. I like that phrase. Okay, of course it was. I mean, it's almost even the public timetable of it all. It just shows a direct connection. Okay. And again, it showed, and this is like this is Pompeo's, bullying, okay, and Bolton's bullying. If you do what we want, you'll get a payday. Okay, you'll get your 30 silver coins, and it's very public, and they like it because they show their power over a small country. Okay, yeah, absolutely. That is such an imperial hubris, isn't it? I mean, they want to show the world that they will get their way, they will buy their way, they'll bribe their way, they'll blackmail their way, they'll threaten their way to their way. I mean, it's such theater, isn't it?
It is a clown world, Peter. That's for sure. Alexander, we did a video and we posted it up today. We did a video last night on Lavrov's comments saying that we are moving towards a new world order. And now we have the IMF dishing out 4.2 billion to Ecuador. Ecuador gives up Assange. How does this fit into Lavrov's statements?
Well, of course it does, because what it shows yet again is that the United States is using every conceivable method that it still possesses in order to bolster its position in various parts of the world, including in Latin America, which it has historically always treated as its backyard. So it feels a challenge there. It sees that that Venezuela is going its own way. It's trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela. It sees that the Russians are in Venezuela, so it doubles down on that. It's Russia! Exactly Russia again. Russia again. So now, of course, the classic game. Peter put it very well. You want Julian Assange. The US has been wanting Julian Assange for a very, very long time. So what do? You bribe the Ecuadorian government with an IMF loan at a time when Ecuador is going into economic crisis and the president is facing corruption charges. in order to get him on side, not just with Julian Assange, by the way, but as part of this campaign against Venezuela. It's part of the game of international diplomacy, which we see being played all over the world. And let us be very clear about it. It's a game the United States, step by step, trick by trick, is gradually losing. They may win,
Exactly.
they may win the odd trick, as they have with this in this case, but overall, the balance is shifting against them.
Yeah, but and they're leveraging institutions, Peter, aren't they? Like they did it in Ukraine too, didn't they? Yeah. With the IMF.
I would contest the word diplomacy. I call it thuggery, okay? Because it isn't diplomacy. Of course, this is the corruption of these institutions, okay? I mean, there's conditionality that is attached to all of these things here, and that's why you have Bolton and Pompeo traipsing around the world, criticizing China's economic and financial relationship. What they do is they create debt slavery. I mean, it's almost as though they're talking about the institutions that they control. Okay, I mean, the last thing a country wants to do is to have to get in bed with the IMF. Oh, God help the people. Okay. God help the people that have to do that. The IMF has one of the worst records, okay? Because what they do is they want you to, they want state assets to be privatized. You have these people with very, very deep pockets. International corporations come in and just take you apart, like they tried to do and they, to a great extent, they did to Russia in the 1990s. Okay, strip it down, strip it down. Okay, that's what they want to do, and that's what these IMF does all of the time. Why do you think so many governments in Latin America say IMF? No, never again, never again. Okay, because now Ecuador, I mean, they're squeezed. Okay, and the IMF is just one of these institutions that is just it's a front organization for the Washington consensus, and you mentioned Ukraine. So let's take the example of Greece that is essentially had a good part of its population thrown in the gutter for a generation at the very least here, because they didn't conform to the rules of the IMF, but in the same fiscal quarter, Ukraine that doesn't meet any of the standards of the IMF, they get their payday. Okay, it's a political tool, and let's be honest about it. It's a political tool, and if Washington doesn't want the IMF to dole out some money to a country, that country won't get it. It's pure and simple.
Alexander, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, Peter's absolutely right. I mean, the IMF is based in Washington, D.C., and it's run by the United States. There's a very cushy arrangement whereby an American always heads the World Bank, and a West European, I should stress, always heads the IMF. The United States and its Western allies have rigged voting rights in the IMF, always to give them a majority, even though this no longer remotely corresponds
to reality,
to the actual economic balance around the world. So, of course, the IMF and the World Bank do exactly what the United States tells them. But what is happening in consequence of this is we're starting to see countervailing and opposite institutions emerging. So the Chinese have set up the Asian Investment Bank. There's the BRICS Bank that's also being set up. There are all sorts of other financial institutions that are being created, which are adversarial and are outside the control of the United States and by countries that have the financial firepower now to create them.
Yeah, and I was just reading here today is that Turkey and Russia have set up a $1 billion investment fund. Okay, there are other places you can go. And you may, people that are very interested in this, there's an academic literature attached to it. It's called The World Without the West. And it's exactly what Alexander Mercouris was talking about, where you have alternative financial institutions, alternative trade institutions, because, the U.S. always wants to, they believe we have the gold, so we can make the golden rules because they have the control. But when you have these other institutions, they don't have the same political imperatives built into them, and there's no conditionality or very little conditionality. And more and more countries are interested in doing that because these Western institutions do not reflect the economic and trade realities of today. Far from it. Okay,
No.
They really belong in a museum, like NATO. Okay, they don't they serve no real purpose. Their purpose is to maintain their existence. That's their purpose.
All right, Courtney, thank you for your super chat. We appreciate it, guys. Hit that like button, smash that like button. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the Duran. Remember to click that notifications bell to get notifications when and if YouTube does decide to send those notifications out when we post a new video. We don't know how the algorithm decides who they send it out to when you do click that bell, but as we said, Peter,
I would like to know what the crosstalk algorithm is for these people, okay? Because I've been told that the last program I did with the, it was with Alexander Mercouris, and the one before that with the great Ray McGovern and great Joe Loria, that people are hitting likes and it's not registering, okay? I mean, you can't like it anymore. They don't want you to like it, and it has to be I mean, I'm not a tech guy by any stretch of the imagination, but do they have a specific algorithm for crosstalk? One has to wonder.
It wouldn't be hard for them to do it.
They're targeting
no, it wouldn't be hard.
Yeah, it wouldn't be hard for them to do it. Alexander, how serious is Turkey's move away from NATO? It seems with every day that goes by, Turkey keeps on drifting more away from NATO and the West, and moving more towards China and Russia. But I always come back to the same point. And Duran. I always come back to the same point that Erdogan is, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right because some people say I'm not pronouncing it right. Erdogan is very unpredictable, and he can switch back, with the snap of a finger. What do you make of this?
We've said this so many times. Go ahead, Alexander Mercouris.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're right on both counts. First of all, I think it's important to say that Turkey is being pushed away from the West. What it has found, and I can't pronounce his name properly, and I apologize. I know it's Erdogan, but I struggle to do it. So I'm just going to call him Erdogan, even though I know that's not how his name is pronounced.
Everybody knows who you're talking about. So
who am I talking about? Okay. Exactly. But I mean, I don't think he ever had any plan at any earlier time in his presidency or premiership to separate Turkey from the West. But he has found, as everybody always does, that with the United States, it is never a partnership. It is always subordination. So that he cannot accept that. I think more and more people in Turkey cannot accept that. And that is why Turkey is finding itself being pushed ever more closely into the Russian-Chinese Eurasian embrace. But Turkey is coming under enormous pressure. The lira, the Turkish currency, is again down. Unemployment is rising. Inflation is rising. The economy in Turkey is not in a good way. Investors are pulling out. So he's coming under enormous pressure. And he is first and foremost, and above all else, a survivor. He is somebody who, at the end of the day, is going to say to himself, if this situation continues in this way, what choice do I have? Do I go for a quiet life with the West, or do I assert Turkey's independence with the East? And with a man like Erdogan, you can never be sure that he will ever stick to any particular policy for any length of time, especially when his own survival is now in jeopardy.
Yeah, but he's the classic transactional political figure.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. He's going to, he believes, and he demonstrates all the time that he sees his Turkey's geopolitical and geofinancial position as a bazaar. He plays the bazaar as they come. Okay, and he's very good at it. Okay, he's an amazing tactician, a strategist that's in doubt. Okay, but as a tactician, of course. And I've said so many times in our podcast, Turkey's not leaving NATO, at least not yet. And if it does, it will extract what it wants from, if it's going to make a deal with the, let's say, the Eurasian world, it's going to want a reason why to cut its ties with NATO. It's going to want something for it. It's not going to do it for nothing. It's not going to do it out of, there's a price, okay? There's a price. And we haven't gotten there yet, okay? No. I still stand firm that Erdogan has not seen the gambit where he gets his payday to get out of NATO, okay? No. So he's not going to do it yet, but we're going to go through these brush fires, as it were, on a very regular basis, okay? Because if you look at the Washington consensus types, there is a growing number of them just saying, get rid of Turkey. We don't need it, okay? They go through the values thing, which is so very boring because these people have no values. I don't know why they talk about values, but there is a growing constituency that is contemplating a break with Turkey. But
Peter, is one of his paydays does that have to involve the U.S. giving up Gulen? I believe it's Gulen in the U.S. Would that be good enough for Erdogan to start approaching NATO again in the West?
I still think that's more of a public relations thing. It's a reason why with the attempted coup and all of that. No, I don't think that's really at the core of it. I think it's a talking point, but I don't think it's a policy plank that is, it's a make or break of anything, okay? I mean, that's this way. It's like the Democrats, it's Russia, 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 and for Erdogan, it's Gulen, 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 okay? That's how I see that play.
All right, Alexander, one country that does want to break away and that voted to break away, but is not breaking away.
No, it's bad.
Because we are in a clown world where the people voted, 17 million plus voted to leave the European Union.
Yes.
And for that vote, they got more rule of the European Union. Yeah. So, Alexander, what is going on in the clown world that is Theresa May?
Well, indeed. Can I just repeat again the point you made, but to slightly elaborate on it? This was a referendum in which the British people, overwhelmingly the people of England outside London, the core territory of the United Kingdom, voted to take back control from the EU, and where, as a result of the machinations of Theresa May and of the political establishment in Westminster, the EU now has even more control. It is dictating the form of this supposed Brexit, which increasingly looks unlikely to happen. And it is also dictating the timetable. So, so far from taking control, we have actually lost more control. And if Theresa May's withdrawal agreement or any variant of it is ever implemented and passed, we will have even less control because we will be trapped in a customs union, which we can never leave, where the EU makes the rules, where the EU cuts trade deals with other countries, and where Britain has no voice in them and is obliged to accept them. So we are not taking back control, we are giving more and more of it up. And that is the dismal reality of what Theresa May, and not just Theresa May, but the entire political class in London have achieved for us. So if you talk about a clown world, well, it truly is the world turned upside down. As a famous poem in England from the 17th century once put it.
Peter is shaking his head in disbelief.
No, but I mean, it once was a proud country. I mean, the implication, stepping back a little bit, I mean, whether Brexit happens or not, okay, the impact of this indecision and political corruption, I would say, will have lasting damage on the legitimacy of the ruling classes in the UK. Because the ruling classes are obviously remainders, okay? And we see this division, this chasm growing and growing. Britain gave so many ideas about modern politics have come from England, okay? And millions of people still strive for the rule of law, freedom of speech, assembly. Okay, the right not to be have your possessions taken by the state. I mean, so much, and the last 2 years have just shown just how dysfunctional the UK is. And I've said this before, and I really am adamant about it. You know, then the UK should stop trying to export all of those values because they're not living up to any of them. Okay, this surrender of sovereignty is breathtaking. Yes. Okay, and you know, we've said it on this podcast too, and I won't belabor the point, but the whole tone and strategy of the EU, it's not really directed against the UK anymore. It's directed against other members of the EU. That you want to go down this path when you see how painful it is, and Britain's a relatively strong country. Let's say like a Greece or a Hungary or a Poland. You know, they'll squash them like a bug. Okay, so there's a lot of theater going on here right now, but I think this is one of the most shameful moments in British history. I mean, it really does leave me speechless. How you have elected officials, and it's publicly known that they represent Brexiteers, but they will not enact their will. And at the end of the day, I believe politicians should vote on the basis of their consciousness, what they feel is right. But at the end of the day, they do have to represent the will of the people that voted for them. That is a fundamental principle of democracy, at the core of why we have elections here. And the MPs, I mean, as an American, I watch these debates because they're humorous, because it's so different than America. Okay, because there are actually still some very clever people that speak. I love eloquence. Okay, but looking at the Tory side, what happened to the eloquence? It's gone. Okay, I mean they're politically tone deaf. I mean, and when I watch these debates, I come away with the conclusion that they think we're stupid. They talk down to us all of the time. And I can see how that makes the people that voted for Brexit furious, because the British electorate is intelligent. They know what they want. They knew what they wanted when they voted to leave the European Union. But the deal that has been made is just. I remember when her deal first came out, and we did a podcast. I just said that this is the worst of all possible worlds. That's what she wants to deliver. They want even more dependence with it's like, you know, taxation without representation. That's essentially what we're getting down to.
Alexander, I got some emails during the week about what's going on in Brexit, and there's some people in the chat as well talking about it, that there's a court case in the UK that's trying to stop the Brexit from happening, or saying it's illegal to not go for the will of the people. Is that correct?
Yes, I think what it is, and this is the person who has proposed it, is Sir Bill Cash.
Right, Cash,
who was a former Sir Bill Cash. He is a former Deputy Attorney General, rather Shadow Attorney General. He is one of the most brilliant lawyers in the House of Commons. He's a man in his 70s, and he's been an opponent of the EU for a very, very long time. And his basic argument is that the way in which Theresa May extended the deadline, extended the time for Britain to leave the EU is wrong and illegal, and it goes against British law. And he also says, and I think he's made a compelling case actually, that he's got multiple advice from various Queen's Counsel, those are very, very senior lawyers in Britain, and various retired judges, and that a case is going to be put together to be taken to the High Court in order to challenge this decision to extend the Brexit deadline. I have to say that I find all that incredibly interesting. What would happen if the High Court said that the government had acted illegally? I simply don't know, because I suspect the EU would come back and say, well, you know, maybe that's what your High Court says, but we're not paying any attention, because ultimately the decision is ours. we are the European Council. We make an international treaty with your government, and it is binding upon you. So, though I think it might potentially put Theresa May herself in considerable legal jeopardy if it succeeds, I think people should not have too high expectations of it as derailing this attempt basically to reverse Brexit. So, I mean, I will watch it, I will follow it. Bill Cash is a brilliant lawyer, a very erudite lawyer, but I would stress again, it may not be quite as politically significant or as effective as it might appear to be, or might look to be, simply if you look at the law.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, lost you guys. Lost you
Okay.
guys
All right,
real
right,
quick.
okay.
Lost you guys. Peter, Ukraine elections in a week. Zelensky was supposed to show up for a debate.
No show.
No show. What happened? And what does this mean?
I don't
Does this
really
even
know.
mean anything, or is this insignificant?
I don't know what led up to it, but I think it is very significant here. Zelensky is basically saying he's a comic. You know, he's saying I'm not going to perform in your comedy. I mean, that's basically what he was saying. Okay, I mean, this guy. You know, I mean, did you see the film Being There? You know, Chauncey Gardner.
Yeah.
You know, he said these really brilliant things, but you know, were they really so brilliant? You know, I love that film. I think Peter Sellers played such a great role in that, and he's kind of like a Chauncey Gardner.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say, you know, he was afraid because he doesn't know the issues. He might have been humiliated, or he has this deep strategic plan. You know, making him Poroshenko look like a fool in front of the entire nation. You know, I mean, you could probably argue both sides there, but this Zelensky guy is turning into be a very interesting character. On a more serious note, I'm going to be watching it very closely because my gut feeling is that Poroshenko doesn't want to go peacefully. Okay, and there must be some people still in Washington that might see some value of him. But you know, it's really interesting. You know, where was Victoria Nuland this time? None of all of his Washington allies, as far as I know, none of them went to support him. So, but at the same time, with Zelensky, I think that also the Western, you know, the broad Western deep state, they don't see him as such a threat. I mean, he's not pro-Russian, but he's not as much anti-Russian. And plus, you know, Ukraine's just a mess. And they gave it the West can show they can overthrow governments, but it never is there for, you know, what do we do? I mean, we can go across the entire globe about, you know, overthrowing a government, then not knowing what to do next. Okay. So I'm going to be watching, making sure there's no false flag operations, some kind of provocation, some invented national security. You know, this is what Poroshenko, you know, this is what he traffics in. Okay. I still don't think he's going to want to go so easily. I think they still may have something up their sleeve. And I only say that because of how Ukrainian politics works.
Alexander, you've crunched the numbers pretty well on what's going on in Ukraine and the chances of Poroshenko winning. The chances are pretty much slim to none, correct? Unless he does pull a
slim
stunt.
to none, yeah.
Well, if you believe the opinion polls, which are now looking overwhelming. I mean, the very last opinion poll puts Zelensky with 61% and Poroshenko with just 24%. I mean, it looks like a massive, overwhelming landslide. And what it seems has happened, I mean, if I could just explain this farcical episode at the Olympic Stadium. I mean, apparently what happened is that Zelensky and Poroshenko agreed that they would have their TV debate. They couldn't agree on the day when it would happen. Poroshenko decided all by himself that it was going to be on the 14th of April. So he turned up, and of course Zelensky didn't show. So he was left looking completely ridiculous. And why should Zelensky debate him when he is so far ahead? It looks to me as if Poroshenko is a totally discredited figure in Ukraine now. Apparently, Zelensky leads him in every region. But Peter is absolutely right. The history of Ukraine since 1991 when it became independent shows that power in Ukraine does not ultimately depend on the ballot box. It depends on what happens on the streets. And there, it is the men with guns who are ultimately the arbiters. They are there. They're still there. One senses that on balance, they would prefer Poroshenko, partly because he is so corrupt, and that means they can control him more easily, partly because I think they sense that he is ultimately more in sync with their extreme right uber nationalism than Zelensky is. So this is not a done thing. And I will not believe that Poroshenko has gone until he really has gone, regardless of what the polls say.
The interesting thing to me is that I think one of the political calculations is that most likely, all things being considered as we speak right now, Zelensky will be elected president, but will he be given the power of the presidency? Okay, that's really what it gets down to, because the state apparatus, from the security forces to the Ministry of Interior, I mean, it's all infiltrated by these ultra right-wing neo-fascist groups. Okay, so it's kind of like the Trump phenomenon. Trump, he says something, but the government does, a la Syria, for example, the pullout. Yeah. Okay, I mean, he says something, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I think that's very likely what's going to happen. And plus, in Ukraine, and and I don't want to go down the realm of intrigue or anything like that, but there seems to be ample evidence that Zelensky and Kolomoisky have a relationship. Okay, and so Kolomoisky, the corrupt oligarch, I think he's residing in Israel right now. He may be a puppet master to one degree or another. I think there's enough evidence to show that Zelensky's campaign had financial connections with the Kolomoisky operation. So, we'll see where that goes. But, Ukrainian politics it's never what it seems, okay? There's so much intrigue and corruption behind the veil. And I think that's one of the things why Ukrainian people are just exhausted. They're just exhausted by all of this, okay? And, the people that surrounded Poroshenko after the coup on the Maidan, I mean, it is a spent force. I mean, and this is what I've been saying all along, that revolutionary fervor, nationalist fervor, it can create a political breakthrough, but it can't build an economy, and it can't build an efficient state, okay? Because the nationalists and this Banderite ideology, it is to mobilize people, but it's not to govern. Okay, and we see this with these kind of groups all through the 20th century, and it's still there today.
Where does Tymoshenko's constituency go?
Angry.
Well,
like who will they?
Who
will they side with in general? Who do you expect?
They might not vote. They won't vote. They won't vote.
Yeah. Well, those of them that will vote for Zelensky, because Poroshenko and Tymoshenko are extremely bitter enemies. Poroshenko was one of the people who basically quietly supported behind the scenes the prosecution against Tymoshenko. So the two loathe each other, and that is communicated to their supporters. But against that, Tymoshenko very much wanted to be president of Ukraine, and she's going to hold out. She's not going to give Zelensky any public backing. And as Peter says, a lot of her people probably won't vote. But those that will vote for Zelensky. The best comparison of what might happen if Zelensky is elected is what is happening now in neighboring Moldova. There, a pro-Russian president, Igor Dodon, was elected and is far and away the country's most popular politician. His party, which is the Socialist Party, is the most popular party in Moldova. Yet every attempt that Dodon and the socialists in Moldova have made to improve relations with Russia have been blocked at every turn by oligarch-controlled parties in the Moldovan parliament, which are dead set on any sort of rapprochement with Russia. Now, Moldova is a stable country compared to Ukraine. In Ukraine, Zelensky would face even greater problems than those Dodon is facing in Moldova. And frankly, given his lack of political experience, I have to say that the outlook for him, if he really were to want to improve relations with Russia, doesn't look good at all.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, Danko, a question from Danko. He's taking this exactly where I want to take this as well. Peter, Hillary Clinton was on stage and she said that Julian Assange should pay for his crimes. And we're talking about Ukraine as well. And we are in a clown world. You mentioned Victoria Nuland. Where the hell is Victoria Nuland? Jeffrey Pyatt. I know where Jeffrey Pyatt is. He's ambassador of the United States to Greece. Hence all the problems Greece has with Russia, the diplomatic strain that we're going through with Russia. That's not a surprise. Peter, a question from Danko is, will Hillary Clinton's campaign connections with Ukraine and the oligarchs and everything that's being talked about with the Clinton campaign in Ukraine, is that going to get more oxygen? Are we going to be talking about that more?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. I mean, I was very heartened. Actually, right before we did this podcast, I looked at some clips of William Barr being grilled at the end of last week. Well, he really can hold his own. He really can hold his own. I was really impressed by that. And, you know, they're going to look into this. He already has some people looking into a lot of these connections here right now. It's really interesting is that the Hill, they really like to push, they're really interested in this story. And I think some Ukrainian officials are looking for forgiveness. I mean, they want to kiss a ring. And so they want because they were involved, not Russia, but Ukraine was involved in digging up dirt on Trump's associates, and they gave it to him, okay? But they have a whole lot more, okay? And they want to tell their story to kiss up to Trump, okay? This is not necessarily Poroshenko, but it's really the intelligence services there that want to be on good standing with the United States after the Ukrainians embarrassed themselves. But I do think it will get some more oxygen. I know that the Republicans are finally waking up. You see, Republicans are not very bright, but once they get going, they tend to find the right way. They tend to, okay? I don't have high esteem for the Republican Party, so please remember that. But yes, I think it has legs. I think a lot, as I've said many times. Okay, the Mueller report was one shoe. Now the other shoe is going to drop. Okay, and William Barr gave me a good sense of assurance that he's going to look into the rogue elements of the origins of this conspiracy. And I've said a long time ago, even before we did these podcasts, that, you know, a lot of roads lead to Ukraine. They really do. The Podesta brothers, they might get ensnarled in this even more because they were in partnership with Manafort. I mean, there's so many obvious things. I mean, I remember when I was on the Jimmy Dore show and I was explaining to him the Ukrainian connection to all this, and he's a smart guy, and I have a lot of respect for him. But he said, I've never heard that before. And I said, yeah, because inquiring minds don't exist anymore, okay, in the West, in the Western media, okay? And so there are some inquiring minds right now, and I think we're going to hear a whole lot more about it. I hope so.
Yeah, it is a clown world. Assange is doing time for Clinton's crimes.
Yeah.
Alexander, exactly. Very good comment there. Take us into Ukraine a little, Alexander, as to what's going on. There's Clinton. There's also Biden. Joe Biden, there's Hunter Biden, there's Burisma, there's all kinds of money flowing into Ukraine from the IMF and from institutions flowing into Ukraine and then flowing right back out.
Yeah, absolutely. But can I just add, what an extraordinary comment from Hillary Clinton. What crimes has Julian Assange committed? I mean, there is no world. Exactly. There's no case against him in Sweden. And in relation to this case, which is being brought against him in the United States, which does not involve computer hacking, it does not involve stealing the DNC emails. He's not accused of stealing the DNC emails, merely of publishing them. But he's not yet been convicted of it, so he must be presumed innocent. And Hillary Clinton is a lawyer, by the way.
Hillary Clinton is the last person on the planet to say that statement.
Well, indeed.
But what would you expect from a pathological liar? Okay?
Well, indeed.
A pathological liar.
Well, indeed. Well, I think, going back to Ukraine, I think one thing that has become absolutely crystal clear is that over and above the Ukraine and the 2014 Maidan coup, having been on the part of the United States a geopolitical play, which it was also quite obviously a massive money-making exercise for all sorts of people. Just as, by the way, Russia was in the 1990s. All sorts of carpetbaggers seem to have gone over to Ukraine.
Like Clinton with the Clintons in Haiti, for example.
Again, well, indeed, exactly. And as I said, it's quite obvious now. It's becoming increasingly obvious. All sorts of people were there. Paul Manafort obviously was there, and he's been convicted of it. Poor him, because he's the exception. None of the others so far have. But the Podesta was, as Alex correctly says. Hunter Biden was. All sorts of American citizens were appointed to positions in the Ukrainian government. Let's not forget that. And it turns out that when Ukrainian officials wanted to investigate some of these activities with threads leading back to the United States and possibly pointing fingers at how people in Ukraine were corruptly assisting the Hillary Clinton campaign.
There was a direct connection between the DNC and the Ukrainian government. Direct.
A money trail, Peter. There's money trails and bank transfers.
Exactly. And the US Embassy acted to stop the investigation by the Ukrainians into this very corruption. So, I mean, it's clear to me that Ukraine is a huge story. And of course, it's important to stress again that many of these people who've been mentioned in connection with Russiagate, this man Kalamnik, who was supposed to have been getting polling data from Paul Manafort, for example, they are Ukrainians, not Russians. And not only are they Ukrainians, they're very anti-Russian Ukrainians.
And giving polling data, I never heard about that being against the law.
Well, exactly.
No, they had internal polling data. It's not illegal to show. I mean, maybe not prudent because the other side might get it, but it's not illegal. I don't know. No. I've heard that mentioned so many times, and I would say, so what?
Yes.
But there was no exchange. Okay. No. There was no exchange.
No.
That I'm aware of.
No. But I mean, there's clearly a nexus of contacts and relationships, some of which are clearly corrupt, between people in the United States and Ukraine. There's clearly connections between the Democrats and the DNC, as Peter says, and people in Ukraine. Money has certainly greased all of this. As Alex has said, there is clearly a money trail. If you really want to investigate collusion and conspiracy, follow the money. That's what they said in Watergate. That's what you should do here. And the money seems to lead to Kiev, not to Moscow.
Peter, how big is this story, do you think?
It is huge if inquiring minds want to follow the money trail, as Alexander Mercouris said. Look, one of the things I've always worried about is that even if there's ample evidence of corruption with the DNC in Ukraine, who will carry it? Who will talk about it in the mainstream other than us? Okay, Consortium News will. Okay, I'm sure the Intercept, Glenn Greenwald would probably take that on. I think he would. There'll be
Matt Taibbi,
maybe Aaron Mate, and a variety of writers that are picked up by Zero Hedge. And actually, we get a lot of our stuff from Zero Hedge on these stories.
Yeah, Zero Hedge covers this pretty extensively.
Yeah. But in all fairness, our hard work here, but we are periphery. I mean, if it's not because I'm not really sure Fox News really will want to go down this path. I'm not sure, because they just don't. It's really interesting watching the cable stations to see how many people, I mean, from CNN all the way to Fox, that make really fundamental, simple mistakes over and over again. And it's so infuriating to me, because these are knowable facts, all right?
Yeah.
But because Fox has a narrative that it is pushing, and CNN and MSNBC have their own narrative. And if these stories about Ukraine and corruption in American politics, if it doesn't fit their narratives, they just let it go. They don't pay attention to it.
All right, so I asked the Ukraine elections, when are they? The final round is next week on Sunday. Is that correct?
That's right, 21st of April.
21st of April are the
Western Easter Day.
Yeah, it'll be there. It'll be there April Fool's Day.
Okay, there you go. Let's get to a super chat here from Fernbalen. Alexander, is it legal for the USA to sanction a country without UN approval?
That is an excellent question. That is a very, very good question indeed. I would say that in most cases it is not, actually. Now, of course, one has to be careful about this, because no country is under any duty to trade with any other country. But there is now a large framework of international trade law administered by the World Trade Organization, at least in theory, which these sanctions very often seem to me to go completely against. And of course, the United States has now been increasingly doing something else, which is extremely concerning, which is that it has been imposing what it calls secondary sanctions. That is, sanctions upon other people, third parties, who trade with countries and businesses which the United States has itself sanctioned. And that, I think, is clearly illegal and certainly goes against the authority of the United Nations Security Council.
Yep.
Part 7 of the UN Charter makes it very clear that sanctions is an instrument, is conceived of first and foremost as an instrument to be applied by the United Nations Security Council as part of its overall mandate to preserve peace. For countries to start doing this sort of thing unilaterally has long seemed to me to go against the authority of the UN Security Council and to usurp it. I'm going to make one further point, which is if the sanctions the US imposes are legally dubious, the sanctions the European Union imposes are more dubious still, because no one has successfully pointed out to me any provision in any of the treaties that created the European Union or which administer its affairs, which to me seem to give the European Union the authority to impose sanctions. I've seen certain sections of the Lisbon Treaty in particular being cited, but they do not actually, it seems to me, confer the authority to impose sanctions. So legally dubious and often illegal on the part of the United States. That's my view. Almost entirely illegal in relation to the European Union. That is also my view.
Thank God we have Alexander Mercouris here.
Thank God. The Oracle of London. Peter, the Yellow Vests. Not much news coming out of France with the Yellow Vests last week and this week. What's going on? Is this movement starting to die down, or is it a media blackout?
I don't think it's a little bit of combination of both here. I think the Yellow Vests have to recalibrate because of the kind of laws against assembly that are being passed in France. Okay, I mean, it's very much an authoritarian mindset. I mean, if you don't like the message of protesters, then don't let them protest. I mean, what? That's so democratic from democratic France. Huh? I had dinner yesterday with Xavier Moreau. And I got my impression from him is that a lot of the yellow vests, because it is really essentially still a leaderless movement, are recalibrating on how to react to the government crackdown on the yellow vests. But he told me that this is, in his opinion, this is going to be a permanent fixture of French politics. I mean, it's not going to go away. It's simply not going to go away. And the longer it stays together as a loose group, the more that they'll be able to articulate their interest and find ways to move forward without being overly politicized. See, there's a lot of interesting literature about protest groups. The more they organize and create structures, the more they're open to corruption and pressure from the state. So they want to find this very delicate balance, because then you don't want entryism where people just flood it to infiltrate it and then essentially break it apart because they may be infiltrators working for the state. But you don't want to be so loose where the members of the protest groups feel isolated from each other. So it's a project in progress. Okay, and I still have a lot of hope for the yellow vests. And they have a lot of. They know who they are. See, this movement is really done. They've been able to identify other people that feel like them. This is so very important because the state is not reacting to their interests. As a matter of fact, they're oblivious that these highly paid bureaucrats are oblivious to the way the average person lives. And if you look at people like to look at the major cities because there's a lot more of a media presence to report on these things. But the yellow vests are quite literally in the center of the country. Okay, and this is rural France, small towns and villages, and this is the bulk of it, and it is very, very French. Okay, and they really believe that, and they see themselves as that. This is a fight for French culture. You don't underestimate that. Obviously, there's the bread and butter issues, but it's also what it means to be French. And people in middle of France, these are very proud French people.
Yeah, can I just cut in there because
yes.
my wife was actually in Paris last weekend, and what she found was that a lot of Paris on a Saturday is now basically in lockdown. Many of the metro stations are closed. She was attending an academic conference where many of the academics are hostile to the yellow vests, but all of them said, almost without exception, that the actions of the police are completely disproportionate and are provoking a growing anger, even amongst people who are either unsympathetic to the yellow vests or actively hostile to them. So I would say, based on what my wife heard and saw in Paris, of course, she was kept away from some of the more fiery areas because the authorities wanted to keep her away. But in fact, it is very much still ongoing. And as I said, there's still an awful lot of anger and an awful lot of violence.
And the government isn't addressing it. Okay?
No.
They're not.
No. I also understand that the opinion polls show that President Macron's great debate, which involved him going around France and speaking to carefully picked audiences who would ask him questions that were clearly prepared in advance, that has completely flopped with the French people. They were completely unimpressed by it. So the great debate, like virtually everything else that Macron has done, was a grandiose scheme that, when you drill it down, has amounted to nothing.
Yeah, it's a few French friends of mine told me, said he's the PowerPoint president. No. And it's such an insulting approach to very serious and complicated problems. And here he goes, this ex-banker, all you have to, it's all in one page. We'll all figure it out all together. Okay.
Yes.
Excuse me. I'm going to go back to my gilded office in Paris. Bye.
Yes.
Where's Marine Le Pen, Alexander? Number one, where's Marine Le Pen? Number two is we're going to have European elections coming up.
I'll just say real quick, she's playing it smart.
She's playing it smart.
She has.
And Alexander, with the elections, we also had elections in Finland as well, and we also saw a snap back from the neoliberal model. We saw the center right actually and
Yes.
some far-right parties actually gain a lot of traction. So,
Well, indeed.
the overall feel of opposition parties and the center right seems to be picking up traction in Europe.
We need to, I mean, if we turn to Marine Le Pen, what I'm hearing is that over the last couple of months, her movement, her political movement in France, and she herself have been re-energized. And it is now turning, the European elections are now turning into a slugfest between her and Macron, with the advantage now shifting increasingly towards Le Pen. One of the reasons why Macron was so keen to get the British out of the European Union is apparently that he wants to isolate Marine Le Pen to the greatest extent that he can. So she is rising. I think she's played, as Peter says, this whole yellow vest protest movement with great skill. She's not tried to take it over or appropriate it. And at the same time, she's let it rumble away in the background in a way that makes it possible for her to say to the French people, look, I'm listening to you. I am the person who articulates your grievances. This utterly remote figure, this, phony Louis XIV in his Elysee palace, in his gilded office, he is not listening to you. And he doesn't really care about you. And his great debate, he's not talking to you. He's basically talking to himself. So I think she's done actually quite well. And I think we should watch these European elections in France now very carefully. Now, Finland is an extraordinarily interesting vote.
Can I just say something real quick about Le Pen so we can move on? But the way I read her in her movement is that they're not actively trying to poach the yellow vests. She's basically saying, well, if you can come to us, but it's up to you. Okay, because you know what you need, you know what you want, and we're here if you need us, but keep going. Okay, there's no active poaching of the yellow vest. That's so very smart. I'm sorry, Finland. Go ahead, Alexander.
Yes, I mean, the point about Finland is I used to go to Finland, believe it or not, quite a lot, because my brother at one time, his family was there, and my daughter-in-law, my niece, not my daughter, my niece used to actually go to European school in Finland. And one of the things I've noticed is this very orderly, very rich, very social democratic country has been decaying. It joined the European Union. It's been in a state of almost permanent economic recession. And of course, people are becoming very angry. And this is, of course, a point that Peter often makes. People are also starting to feel that the Finnish identity is becoming threatened. And of course, the other thing was about Finland. It was always asked to contribute large sums of money to the Greek bailouts. People in Finland were very skeptical about that, not because they were hostile to the Greeks, but because they understood perfectly well that it was more money being thrown away to keep the Eurozone project going. So I could see over years this discontent rising, just as I could see Helsinki, a very proud and handsome and orderly city, slowly decaying. And of course, what has now happened is that all of this has come together, and we see the Finns party, which has been for a long time the focus of anti-EU sentiment, or shall we say, integrationist EU sentiment in Finland. It's now staged almost a breakthrough, because it came just a few, less than 1 percentage point behind the main party, which is the Social Democratic Party, which, of course, anywhere else in Scandinavia, has been one of the great traditional parties in Finland. So we are seeing in Finland a shift to the right in what has traditionally been a fairly leftist country, and we're also a reassertion of sovereignty, and very, very much a pitch against the EU and the whole integrationist model that is going on there. And it shows, to my mind, that what Peter's point about, that there's going to be an anti-EU tide is running very strong right across Europe. It's now reached Finland, all in the run-up to the European elections in May, where another group of voters from a much bigger country are going to be voting, many of them very angry, and they will, of course, be the British voters who had been promised repeatedly that they wouldn't have to vote at all.
Alexander, there was also a move to the left in Finland, correct? I mean, it was a move left and right, and the center kind of got squeezed.
Yes. That's the pattern. Can I just say also, by the way, I mean, to my mind, this is a return to real politics. What we have had, what we used to have everywhere in the West is we had a right-wing party and we had a left-wing party, and they would be in competition with each other, and one would support more welfare systems and more public ownership. Others would support a more free market model, and sometimes you tilt to the one and sometimes you tilt to the other, and that was a real politics, a politics of choice. What we have had over the last 30 years is a politics where there is no choice, where everybody is supposed to agree around this so-called center, which is in fact a very oppressive and increasingly authoritarian center. And the result has been a system where politics has been abolished, where politicians no longer effectively work as politicians anymore. I mean, Peter was making, I think, a very powerful point before about the British political class no longer doing what the people wanted. What they actually do, it seems to me, increasingly, is they take their orders from Brussels. Their loyalty is no longer to the people they represent, working class people who might want, more welfarist policies, or middle class people who might want more entrepreneurial policies. They take their orders from a remote capital in Brussels. It's become less and less politically engaged. And what we see in Finland, and we've seen it in Germany, and we're seeing it in France, and we've seen it in Italy, and I predict we're going to see it in Britain very long, is we're seeing finally real politics starting to come back.
Another thing I think is really interesting that just came to mind is that, also, Alexander Mercouris talked about kind of the physical world, okay? But what about culture and speech? And now you have the Brussels bureaucracy essentially going down the path of enforced speech. What you can say about Muslims, what you can say about immigration. I mean, this is an authoritarian project here. It's you have people mandating what you can think. Okay, that is the wrong path to go down to. Really, what we with this radical center is really the Blairization of European. It is. Okay,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're quite right.
He's the culprit in all of this here. Okay, this is this nightmare ideology that Blair exercised with so much power. I mean, if he hadn't been such a crook. We all right?
No. I just want to stop you very, very quickly, Peter. Don't lose that train of thought. Purple Carnation says, yes, Alexander, no choice. That's what Blair accomplished. Go on, Peter.
Okay. I'm secretly messaging people. Okay. No, but Blair was it's widely known that he was going to get the presidency of the European Commission. I mean, that was his trajectory. Okay, but events got in its way. I mean, so he could continue with his poisonous politics for not only did he do to the UK, he wanted to go continental wide. No, people are revolting against this. I've said this before, and it's important to repeat it. The European Union basically had two pillars: prosperity and security, and they don't deliver on either anymore. Okay, enough is enough. And Alexander Mercouris is right. Let's go back to real politics. Okay, not politics as bureaucracy. This is Max Weber, the great German sociologist, predicted this would happen when the political and state and the goals and the mission of the state would be so fused together you wouldn't be able to tell one from the other. Okay, and that's what's happened here. And this is what it turns into an authoritarian project. And people are rejecting that, okay, all across the continent. All right. And so and I'm not surprised in some parts of the the electorate in the European Union, where some people want to go even further to the right, and that's usually not in a cultural sense, but usually in an economic sense, like guaranteed minimum wages and stuff like that. I get that. Okay, but that's the makings of politics. That's what we need to discuss. Okay, and that's a healthy process. That's very healthy.
Alexander, clown world. Blair destroyed Iraq. He lied to everyone about WMDs. S. Bennett says, Blair, what a chameleon. Here we are, 2019, still talking about Blair, still influenced by Blair's philosophies.
And he filled his pockets by
and
being
he filled his,
by invoice.
Became very rich.
For me, there are two political leaders who, more than anyone else, epitomize the type of politics Peter was talking about and which I was talking about previously, the politics of no choice and of rule by a corrupt, ultimately corrupt center. Bill Clinton in the United States, Tony Blair in Britain. Tony Blair learned an awful lot from watching how Bill Clinton worked. And yes, I think that Blair has deeply demoralized politics in Britain to an extraordinary degree. I should say that in the first election, where he was overwhelmingly elected, I already decided at that point that I wasn't voting for him. I could see very quickly, long before, exactly what sort of a person he was. And I will never forget how he used to talk about how, Labour politicians would be whiter than white, how you can trust me because I'm a very straight guy. How I remember all these words and clever phrases that he was saying. He said them very, very cleverly. And we've declined from Blair. We see his imitators today. And what do we see? We see Emmanuel Macron in France and Peter's favorite man, Justin Trudeau in Canada.
Who's not doing very well in Canada right now. There's own scandal and corruption.
I'm playing my violin over here in Moscow for Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, he is not doing very well at all. Let's go to some super chats. From John Huber, hey, Alex, I would like to buy a black baseball style hat with the gold Duran logo on the front. What do you think? We actually have that type of hat. John, if you go to the hats, I think you'll find one with the gold logo. From Brave New Perth, Peter, super chat. Hey, Peter, when will there be a crosstalk episode on the New Zealand shooter and Israel bombing Syria?
On the New Zealand story, I think when the trial starts, I'm going to approach that more from a free speech position and how the social media platforms want to control the commentary and the discourse on it. I was very, very disappointed. You have this tragedy that we don't really know very much about. I saw the alleged video. I have my own questions. But for me, it was this almost a drop of drop of a coin. Censorship is employed immediately. And this is, I find this very, very disturbing. There are disturbing things in the world. We all see disturbing things, okay? And that's part of our life. But I don't want someone else determining what I should see and what I should draw from it, okay? And that is again, going down an authoritarian path. As far as Israel bombing Syria, well, what's new, okay? I mean, until we really know what direction the Turks and the Americans are going to take in Syria, it's still all up in the air, as slowly but surely Idlib is going to be liberated. And I'm going to agree with Alexander Mercouris on that. It doesn't get a lot of airtime. I think when there is movement in Syria, go to Moon of Alabama. They're really good at that, following it, because they have real expertise. So, when we get to another tipping point on Syria, of course I'm on it. And we've done dozens and dozens and dozens of programs on Syria, and I want to keep people informed about it, okay? Because the mainstream media doesn't.
All right, from Jonathan Powling, Trudeau rant, Peter. Is there a Trudeau rant today?
Not today. Look, I want to tell everybody I'm having my new apartment designed and decorated, and it takes a lot of time. With crosstalk, with this and with that, it's very expensive. If I'm going to fork out the money, I'm going to get what I want.
All right, Alexander. Venezuela, Max Blumenthal, the gray zone, has uncovered that there was, or that there was a discussion to invade Venezuela. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not at all surprised. I'm sure all sorts of discussions are going on at various levels by various people. This looks like a very high-powered meeting by people who are not yet at the very center of the US political system. So as far as I can make out, Bolton, Pompeo, whoever's running the Defense Department at the moment, they were not actually physically present. But it's
very
clear
good point. Good point.
Yeah. But it's clear that serious discussions are underway, and we will see what comes of it. I predict that there would be strong opposition to any such military step, obviously from the Russians and the Chinese, but also within the region itself. But obviously we have to keep an eye on this.
And the U.S. military. I'm not sure that I don't think they're really particularly interested in doing this. No, not at all.
I agree with that also. No,
but the interesting thing is what Max Blumenthal, the great Max Blumenthal, is doing over at Gray Zone. An absolutely brilliant guy. Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal. I watch every single thing they do. The interest with that meeting that took place where he got the physical evidence checking the check-in list. Okay. These are all people that want to have some kind of intervention, okay? And they're not decision makers. They have influence, no doubt about it. That's why they were there. But that was more like a wish list at this point here, okay? That's how I look at it. It certainly, we all should be concerned about it. But even within that meeting, it is speculated the movements of populations as a result of some kind of military operation could be devastating for the entire region and would not leave the U.S. untouched.
Peter, on that note, what do you make of Trump floating out the idea that the migrant crisis and the migrants entering the United States should be relocated to sanctuary cities? And what do you make of the Democrat reaction to Trump's idea?
I thought it was a brilliant move. Okay, I thought it was brilliant. You really want them? Okay, we'll deliver them. We'll fly them in. We'll bus them in. Yeah, fine. Of course, the liberals reacted in their most the hypocrites as usual. No, immigrants is good for the country, but not in my neighborhood. Okay, not in my zip code. Always in somebody else's zip code. All right. I mean, Nancy Pelosi. She's one of the richest, if not richest, member of Congress. She has essentially a palace. How many rooms are she going to open up to immigrants? I want to know, Nancy. Let me know. Let us know here, because you're not going to do that. What was it? I saw it. It was just on Facebook. I didn't read it because I don't really pay attention to Cher. But apparently Cher was outraged that maybe her house could be taken over by people from south of the border, okay? No, they show their true colors when their vested interests, their real physical interests are touched upon, okay? That's when you know that the level of hypocrisy of these liberals, when it touches them, okay? I'm sure all of these people that are horrified by it don't have a problem with a Guatemalan woman taking care of their children and an El Salvadorian man cutting their lawn. That's all nice and fine, but I don't want to live with them, okay? That's their sense. That's their hypocrisy.
Alexander, what do you make of Trump's move there? Do you think it was a good move for him to do that?
I don't think it's going to happen. I think it was more rhetorical.
Yeah, more rhetorical.
I have to say I tend to agree with Peter about this. I think Trump makes lots of rhetorical moves. I don't think there's any very great substance to it. I'm with Peter on this one.
Having said that, if the U.S. economy does not go into recession between now and the election, but if Donald Trump doesn't get his wall, he's vulnerable. He's vulnerable. But I'm sure we'll be dragged into this ridiculous election cycle again. It's good theater. It's good talking head stuff. But, when I look at the lineup from the Democrats, it's like, wow, we're calling this bozo world. Well, that's a bozo lineup. I mean, wow. there's no gravitas there at all. What is it? Swalwell got in there. I mean, oh my God.
He still believes that Russia. He still believes that Russia meddled in the election. Swalwell. He's still on that talking point.
Well, no, but he's the Joe McCarthy of the party, next to Adam Schiff. Okay, he thinks that he can get himself. You got to remember. It was really interesting. If you look at in 1962. Richard Nixon ran for governor of California. Now, I mean, Richard Nixon had very high-profile name, no doubt. I mean, he was a former vice president for 8 years under a very popular president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. But he ran on his red-baiting campaign. He ran on those issues, and he got clobbered. Okay, I think just as I think it was. I'm not sure what it was. I saw it on Fox or an alternative media. But I saw it on YouTube, and it was someone going to town halls to all of America. Not one question was brought up about Russiagate, healthcare, the drug, the addiction problem in the United States. Minimum wage. I mean. Women's rights. I mean, all of the issues that people talk about. Not one question was about this, but it's always in the national news.
All right. Alexander, a super chat from Ian Ward. Central Asia, Russia versus China, ? Is there a possibility that we'll have a Russia versus China type of scenario?
No, I don't think there's any possibility of that at all. I think it's something that gets brought up every so often in the Western media, where they can't really accept the fact that there is now this Russian-Chinese strategic partnership that has evolved. And occasionally, you get some people of a very anti-government liberal persuasion in Russia floating it also. But the reality is that the Russians and the Chinese cooperate very well in Central Asia. The Chinese, I've actually heard Chinese say this, that they accept that Russia has a kind of leading political role in Central Asia. In return, the Russians support China's one China policy. In other words, Taiwan is part of China. That's what that amounts to. And at the same time, because the Chinese accept that it's the Russians who take the lead in the political and security arrangements, that allows the Chinese to establish economic links in Central Asia with the agreement of the Russians. So we are looking at a collaborative and complementary approach in Central Asia, not a competitive one. We should not, I think, get thrown by these attempts by some people to play mischief between these two powers in this particular region.
On top of it, and this has been an ongoing process, okay? These people, talking heads in the media, suddenly realize this. But no, I mean, I think all of us here and a lot of our viewers are very critical of the presidency of Boris Yeltsin. But it was the one thing that of his foreign policy that I agree with, and I think is still giving fruit, is that the Chinese and the Russians said, "Hey, look, we're not going to be competitors in Central Asia. We're going to cooperate over a wide variety of spheres. Russia will have predominance, but not hegemony in some areas. China will have dominance, but not hegemony in other areas." And it's been working out really quite well, and particularly through trade routes. There's natural resources right there where everyone benefits. Basically, it's a win-win policy for China and Russia, and for Central Asia on top of it.
Yes.
Peter, super chat. How many bow ties do you have?
Oh, I've never really counted. Probably about 60 or 70, and growing.
And growing.
I'm one of those persons that's very difficult to buy a gift, so I always say bow ties and socks, because I have like 500 pairs of socks. So.
All right, Alexander. We started the live stream with Assange. I want to end it with Assange, and there were people outside of the prison in London over the weekend, and they were protesting. I believe that at that event was George Galloway. I believe he spoke. I believe, who else? Patrick Henningston from 21st Century Wire was
Chris
also
Williamson,
there.
Chris Williamson, who's an MP.
We have some videos that we'll be putting up, I believe, tomorrow and Wednesday. Can you give us some insight as to what was happening in London?
Yes, I mean, it was a group of people from various anti-war and pro-democracy groups, and they came to express their anger at the way Julian Assange has been treated and their opposition to the moves to extradite him. And of course, what all of these people said, and when you put up the videos, you will see how eloquently so many people spoke. Their concern was that free speech, the ability to expose war crimes, is being gradually and steadily eroded away, and that this attack on Julian Assange is ultimately an attack on democracy.
On
because
all of us.
if we are not able to know what our governments are doing, we cannot hold them to account. And accountability is the essence of democracy. So that was what it was all crystallized around. I should add that Belmarsh prison, where Julian Assange is being held, is not only a category A prison, it's been compared by some people to Guantanamo as being, the toughest prison, the most secure prison in Britain. And by the way, it's huge. But it is also very remote. It's very inaccessible from anywhere in London. So he's been sent there precisely to make it more difficult, in my opinion, for people to come round and to protest. And yet we saw that people did, and I expect that this will continue and it will gather pace. And when proceedings do begin in court, assuming they're allowed to proceed, I'm sure that we will be seeing some of the same people, but also many, many more people coming out and protesting also. So we will see, I think, a lot of people expressing the very serious concerns a lot of people have about this Assange business. I would add that Assange is one issue. Brexit, the way our political system has sabotaged a democratic vote, and has shown its loyalties are not to the British people or to British democracy, but to other entities which exist overseas. I think this is also coming together with Assange. And I have never known people in Britain to be so angry and so disillusioned with their political class, with their media, the media, of course, being part of the political class, and with their MPs in the House of Commons. So I expect that we will be seeing more of this, and we will be seeing more agitation. And I would strongly recommend that people watch those videos when they go up, because they will give one a very good sense of how British people feel about this affair.
Who would have thought a computer geek in Supermax? Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Alexander, how long is Assange going to be staying at that prison? You said it's a category A prison.
Yeah.
How is his life in danger there?
No.
And do you think there'll be American agents and government officials who visit him in the prison and try to extract information?
Well, as to the second, who knows? I don't know who he's going to be, who's going to be watching him, or who's going to be speaking to him in that prison, apart from those lawyers and those visitors who want to see him and whom he wants to see, who the British authorities allow him to see. So I don't know about that. As to his life being in danger, people do commit suicide in British prisons. I watched the pictures of Assange coming out of the Ecuadorian embassy, where he is being held in very close custody and under very, very tight surveillance. And I have to say, I was shocked by how he looked. I thought he looked extremely unwell. And putting him in a place like Belmarsh, I cannot bring myself to believe that the British authorities will themselves actually do anything to him. But I question whether a man who is so obviously ill, because he is, should be kept in a place like that. And that may cause concerns, legitimate concerns for his health. Chelsea Manning, when she was held in solitary confinement, apparently made several suicide attempts and engaged in self-harm. I hope that doesn't happen with Julian Assange. But I have to say, if it did, it wouldn't astonish me.
Yeah.
Does a man like that, Alexander, does he get put into the general population? Do they keep him isolated? I mean, such a high profile.
I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess that they'd keep him pretty isolated. I wouldn't have thought that they'd want to expose him to the other prisoners. Some of the people in Belmarsh are very dangerous and very violent people. But criminals can be a strange group of people, and they might have some sympathy for someone who they may feel is not in prison justly. There is that odd honor amongst criminals, and one has come across it. I've heard about it in other prisons.
Okay. Let's get to some more super chats and we'll wrap it up. From Valley S, thank you for your super chat. And from Mad Hatter, thank you for your super chat as well. From Claudine, guys, one thing we must all remember is no matter which party is in charge, they are both cheeks of the same ass. Love the show.
Mm-hmm. under Clinton and Blair and the world they created, I'm afraid that became true, or largely true.
Yes, the two cheeks of the ass, Clinton and Blair. There's a picture for everybody to depart from this live stream with. All right. Okay. And let's wrap it up there. Peter Lavelle, what are you looking at this week in news? What do you have going on?
Well, as soon as we finish this, I will prepare for a crosstalk tomorrow, and I'm just going to do a very broad brush program on the assault on freedom of speech. And, of course, the Julian Assange case will be front and center.
All right. Alexander, what are you looking at this week?
So first of all, I'm glad to say, for my own sake, that Brexit has gone into remission for the moment because the British Parliament is on holiday. But we have to obviously, which is a huge relief.
Young Blood says the Mueller report may be out this week.
Exactly. I was going to come to that. So the two big things. Obviously, we're going to see what the next moves are on Assange. And any day now, we will be getting the Mueller report. It'll be redacted, obviously, but I will be very interested to see exactly what it says. So a great deal is on the way and is now coming. And I think these are going to be two huge stories this week. Assange still, and the attack on freedom of expression, and the attack on journalists, and the attack on democracy, which is what it all amounts to. And at the same time, the Mueller report, which will show us, I hope, more evidence about how the previous attack on democracy, the attempt to overturn a constitutional election in the United States and to shape it in a particular direction, how that failed. So I will be watching those two events very closely indeed.
All right. And people in the live stream that are asking about Libya, if we've done any videos on Libya, we have done videos on. We have done, and YouTube wasn't happy with us for doing it. They weren't happy. They demonetized. Those videos were quickly demonetized.
But
I think they got monetized again back after we filed a complaint.
Yeah. But as I said, why they were demonetized at all baffles me. Well, obviously we will need to watch Libya, which is a very complicated story with Italy versus France, Saudi Arabia and Russia on the same side, the United States hedging its bets, and worries about the oil market and the overriding concern for the Libyan people themselves, who have been through absolute sheer hell in the last 10 years.
Yeah, another masterpiece from Hillary Clinton. We can thank her for that as well. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
Indeed.
All right, guys. We will wrap it up there. Thank you to everyone who joined us on this live chat. Smash that like button, share the Duran channel with everybody you know, click that notifications bell, follow us on our new Instagram, the Duran_com. And if you have any trouble getting notifications and you want to get more news about the channel, you can subscribe to us on the Blank Chat app. Just follow the Duran channel as well. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Thank you very much, live from Moscow. And Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London. Mr. Mercouris in London. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great Monday. Have a great week. And to everyone who will be celebrating Easter, I believe, next week, which is the Catholic Easter, if I'm not mistaken, have a really good Easter week as well. Take care, everybody.